the first call of a disciple of Jesus is the call to be with Jesus. And I want you to let this sink in. This is as simple as my message is going to be. So if you miss this simple statement, you're going to miss a whole lot. So don't miss this. Don't let the simplicity of this statement cause you to miss the weightiness of this statement. Jesus wants to be with you. Jesus wants to be with you. Oftentimes, our relationship with Jesus is characterized by us defining what we want and making sure that we have informed Jesus through prayer that he's aware of what we want. But I want to suggest to you that it will transform your relationship with Jesus and your prayer life if you shift the focus from what you want and you start to think about what Jesus wants. And one of the primary things that Jesus wants is to be with you. We make a lot in our Christian circles about the presence of Jesus. We want to feel the presence of Jesus. We want to get in the presence of Jesus. We want Pastor Joey to sing us into the presence of Jesus. We want to pray into the presence of Jesus. But it strikes me as a very compelling and interesting thought that I think as much as I want to be in the presence of Jesus, Jesus wants to be in the presence of Jay. And maybe the deficiency in my life with God is not that Jesus isn't making his presence available to me. Maybe the deficiency is I'm not making my presence available to Jesus. Maybe it's not Jesus who's absent from my life. Maybe it's me who's absent from Jesus' life. So that means every day that I wake up on July the 7th, I have to start that morning by remembering and recognizing, what does Jesus want today? He wants to be with me. Any of you that are married can quickly relate to this dynamic that it's possible to be in the same house but not be present. It's possible to be in a conversation. It's possible to be speaking words but not be present. It's possible to come to church. It's possible to lift your hand. It's possible to sing songs. It's possible to pray prayers. It's possible to do a lot of things and not be present. But Jesus doesn't want your religious words. He doesn't want your religious motions. He doesn't want your religious songs. What Jesus wants more than anything is Jesus wants you to be present to him. He chose those that he wanted, and he wanted them to be with him. So now we have Matthew and Peter, James, John, Philip, and Andrew, Thaddeus. They had some cool names, those guys. But now we have Ron, Cole and Morgan and Abby and all the ladies. We got to get out of this little text and remember that Jesus had female disciples. Jesus was an out-of-the-box rabbi. Jesus did things you weren't supposed to do. And I just need to make sure all my lady friends know that Jesus had female disciples. He had women in tow, right? They were following along, sitting at his feet. So this touches everybody. Are you with me? And so This is really interesting because I'm thinking about what it would be like, and we learn a couple of things about some of these disciples. We learn that Matthew is a tax collector, and we learn that Simon is a zealot. Now, if you don't know much about the New Testament times and what was going on there, tax collectors were, as it would sound, I mean, it would be okay for you to put that in 2024 and just think of like an IRS agent. And so if there's any IRS agents in the congregation or listening online, just plug your ears for a minute. But most people don't have a super favorable feeling that comes to their heart when they hear the word IRS agent. Not like on the they don't win the popularity contest usually. And so Matthew is a tax collector. And tax collectors were particularly unpopular in the first century because tax collectors were Jewish people. They were Jewish people who lived in Judea, in and around Jerusalem, but they worked for the Roman government. And the Roman government was oppressing the Jewish people. It was telling them what they could and couldn't do. They had worked out some amenable relationship, and so they were getting along together. But there's always Pilate's presence, who represents Caesar, who needed to be there to crush any little rebellion. And so the Jewish tax collectors would be like me being your family member, your spiritual community, but I'm working for the Roman government that oppresses you and taxes you, and I'm in the middle, and I'm taxing you more taxes than you should pay, because the more I tax you, the more commission I get, and then I give Rome what Rome wants, but I keep the extra that I charged you. How many of you know that's not how to win friends and influence people? That's a way to get rich, but that's not a way to make friends. Matthew is a tax collector. Simon is a zealot. Now, zealots were a certain sector of the Jewish community who felt like this Roman hand of oppression has been on us too long, and they felt like by any means necessary we need to overthrow Rome. And so a zealot's least favorite person would have been a tax collector. I mean, bar none. That's not even speculation. That's just common sense. Because these tax collectors are the problem. They need to join us. And so, 100 or so years before Jesus was born, there were zealots and there were people who came together and they attempted to violently overthrow Rome. And sometimes they almost succeeded. But eventually, Rome's military might would squash them, and thousands of people would die in uprisings trying to overthrow Rome. So these zealots were holding out that when the time's right, God's going to help us. And they were religious zealots. They believed that God was on their side and God was going to help them. This is what we need to do. And so I want you to pay attention to what Jesus is doing, because Jesus is just picking disciples up off of the road, and he gets Simon to follow him, who's a zealot. He gets Judas Iscariot to follow him, who's a zealot. He gets some of John the Baptist's disciples to follow him, who are in a different sect called the Essenes. And then he's just walking along, and if we could go to the place where Matthew is tax collecting. He's in his office. He's doing his job, and Jesus sees him and says, "Hey, follow me." And Matthew gets up from his job, quits his job, walks out of the office, and starts following Jesus and joins this group. Now, what would it be like to be Judas Iscariot or Simon the Zealot, and you just find out that on Tuesday morning, Matthew joined the club? This is ruining our happy vibe. We don't have a culture of hospitality in the company of Jesus anymore. We're losing all of our core values are falling apart because this is uncomfortable. So that's the first thing that I want the Gospel of Mark to show us this morning. And this is really, really simple, but I think it might connect and resonate with you. But it's a pretty obvious observation, but it's easy to miss. It's right here from the text. That's this. I don't get to choose who I follow Jesus with. Jesus chooses that. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? See, this is countercultural because we like to choose our friends. We like to choose everything. We like to choose where we're going to go to eat. We like to choose what we're going to wear. We like to choose everything about our life. But when I commit myself to be a disciple of Jesus, I relinquish my right to choose everything about my life. And part of the surrender that's involved in following Jesus is surrendering that I think I know what is best for my life, and I actually trust that Jesus knows what's best for my life. And so this can flow into a lot of areas of our life, but I don't get to choose who I follow Jesus with. He chooses. And if he wants to put somebody in my group, that's why, you know what, one of the coolest things about church, and a lot of times people don't like this about church, but if you just think about these things, it just makes tons of sense. Generally speaking, if you have a church, and I know that the Gate has always done this, and you guys are doing some of that right now, but if you have small groups at your church, let's just be honest. Let's not try to act holy right now. I'm going to sit down at the table with you and have a really honest conversation with you right now. I want some church people to kind of dial in with me right now, just like if we were eating a cheeseburger and you're being really honest. It's a risky gambit, that small group thing at church, isn't it? When you say, oh yeah, I'll go to a small group, or I'll host a small group at your house, do you know what you just did? You just let go of control. Because it's church, and you don't know who's going to show up. You don't know who's going to be there. You have no control over that. And what you're doing, if you're having a spiritual perspective about that, is you're saying, Jesus, you can be in charge of who I spend time with this evening. I'm preaching real good right now. You're saying, Jesus, if you have enough faith to believe, what I'm doing is I'm saying, Jesus, you're in charge of who I'm going. I'm not going to pick it. I'm not going to choose it. I'm going to embrace who you bring into my life, because maybe Matthew needs a little time with Simon, and maybe Simon needs a little time with Matthew, and maybe James needs a little time with Philip. These disciple relationships are fascinating. Jesus had three. He had three kind of, can we call them favorite disciples? Can we call them like inner circle? Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John. But you remember the story, James and John are brothers. We learned that, right? But Peter had a brother named Andrew. And Andrew discovers Jesus before everybody else. Andrew finds Jesus, and when he hears Jesus in the Gospel of John, Andrew says, I got to go tell my brother, and he goes and gets Simon. He's like, Simon, I found the Messiah. Let me come introduce you to him. And then Andrew brings Simon, Peter, to Jesus, introduces him, and then Simon leapfrogs Andrew, and he gets in the little inner three, and there's two brothers in there, but there's not an inner circle of four, there's an inner circle of three. So how would it feel to be Andrew? How does it feel when it feels like Jesus is giving someone else something that you would have loved to have had, but you can miss the fact that you've been invited to be a part of the 12 because you're so obsessed with the fact that you didn't get invited to be a part of the 3? So we have to give Andrew a lot of credit, because Andrew just keeps on trucking, right? He's just moving right along with Jesus, and he's not concerned with position or privilege. Some of the other disciples will get into arguments, and they'll get their mom involved in politicking with Jesus about who's going to have the right seat at the table. And we don't ever hear Andrew doing that, because somewhere deep in the heart of Andrew, when he met Jesus, he decided, if I have Jesus, that's enough for me. I don't care what position I have. I don't care what acclaim I get. I don't care what title I end up with, as long as I can have Jesus. So these disciples can teach us a lot about walking with Jesus, and we don't get to choose. See, why would Jesus do this? Jesus does this because here's a little newsflash for you. Jesus is more interested in your growth than he is your comfort. So if Jesus knows that putting you with some people who are different than you will make you grow, he'll do it even if it makes you uncomfortable. In fact, I would say to you that the reason that it's important for churches like the Gate to continue to be who they're called to be is because we put on display to the rest of the world how people with various differences come together under the banner of the beauty of Jesus. Amen. 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 And what happens is, when I follow Jesus with people that are different than me, it forms and shapes a deeper Christ-likeness in my heart than I would have had if I was just following Jesus with people I'm comfortable with. You see, if Jesus just let you get all your friends together and have a Bible study following Jesus with the people you already liked, then you're not going to become like Jesus. You're just going to become more like your friends. I'm preaching right now. And there's a lot of churches where people are getting together, they're talking about Jesus, but they're not becoming like Jesus. They're just becoming more and more like themselves. Moo. Y'all hear what I'm saying this morning? So if you let Jesus, he'll put somebody in your midst. He'll put a little piece of sand in your oyster because he wants to produce a pearl. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And a sign of a mature disciple is embracing people that are different than me. Getting good at listening to people that are different than me. Getting good at paying attention to people who have a different story, a different perspective, a different way of thinking. We ought not to be experts in arguing. We ought to be experts in listening. We ought to have holy curiosity when we find out a fellow follower of Jesus thinks differently about somebody, and we ought to sit down with them and listen to them with curiosity about why is it that you feel the way that you feel? Why do you think that the way that you think? And let's follow Jesus together.